Good afternoon and welcome to this live event from Languagenut in Brighton to mark what we all hope will be the closing weeks of teaching during a pandemic. We're here to celebrate the work of modern foreign language teachers over the past year, to consider what's been learnt and to think about what the world of language teaching holds post-COVID, post-Brexit indeed, and a possible new GCSE framework on the way. We've had lots of questions from you over the last few weeks. We're going to try and cover as many of these topics as we can, but please do comment as we go along on either chat or, if you like, on Twitter, and encourage your friends to do the same. And our panel here will try and answer some of that stuff after we've finished talking to you after the next hour. But let me introduce the panel first of all. On my immediate right, Gillian Campbell-Thau. She is the Quality Improvement Officer for Modern Foreign Languages at Glasgow City Council, Strategic Lead for Language Learning and Teaching and Gaelic Medium Education. And on her right, Helen Myers, a trustee, former President of the Association for Language Learning, former Assistant Head at Ashcombe School. On my far left here, the only man on the panel apart from me, Dominic Mott, Head of Senior School and former Head of Languages at Hurstpierpoint College here in Sussex. And next to him, Bayo Fernandez, who's the Head of Spanish, Lead Practitioner for International Languages at the Central South Consortium in Wales. And finally, on my immediate left, Dr. Rachel Hawkes, who is the co-director of NCELP, the Director of International Education and Research at Comberton Academy Trust, and the author, as you probably know, of a number of language textbooks. So we've had a lot of questions, and we're going to try and get through 10 or so if we can by asking our panel to keep it short, but also to argue with each other. The point is not to have great speeches made, but to hear what you might think they really think extempore of the questions you put. The first question is from Gemma Turner in Swansea. Schools have had to be creative to face the challenges of teaching in a pandemic. What positive developments should we keep post-COVID? Helen Myers, you start on this.
I'm sure I'm not the only person who's going to say this, but as a school, we've had to do an awful lot more with technology. It's something which we always did use, and particularly in languages, it's something where I think we thought of all the subjects, languages can make use of technology the best because we've got the speaking, the listening, the reading and writing. So that's something where we've been able to develop it. We've had a reason to do that. And I think in particular, the way that we as a languages community have got together to share ideas and to share actually resources, physical resources as well. That's something which I know we've done and we are continuing now.
Okay. Baye?
I agree with Helen. You know, especially the use of technology is something that after the lockdown, after we came back to lessons, we have used a lot of these apps, and the students, even the ones that are not that keen in languages, they absolutely love playing with the different resources. So that is something that after lockdown we have carried on with those apps.
What about you, Dominic? How do you see it being used, if you agree with them?
Yeah, no, I do agree. I think it's the end of the snow day, isn't it? No longer can you as a pupil sort of pull a sickie and stay at home. You know, hybrid learning means that actually every day literally is a school day, and I think that means much more collaboration outside of the classroom. So I think for preps, homeworks, that opportunity to be able to do speaking work, to be able to do that collaborative work, I think is a real step forwards. And I also think that, you know, there are so many more opportunities for interaction with children in other countries. And I think, you know, whilst we have suffered from not being able to do exchanges and study trips in the same way over the last 18 months or so, this is our opportunity to forge links with children in Spain.
So what
and France.
have you actually been doing?
So I think the best thing to do is where you have an established exchange or a teacher in another country who is able to say, yes, I've got 30 children, they want to learn English. Here, I've got 30 children in Sussex and they want to learn Spanish, to link those children
But
up.
are you doing this as a result of COVID, or are you saying this is a lesson we've learned and we will do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about opportunities of things that I think...
Are you doing it now?
We are not yet. But I think
you've had a year of COVID and you haven't started.
It's a very good point, David. You put me on the spot there. I think I think it's been difficult to adapt to what is a very fast-changing world. The children haven't physically been in school for a lot of the time, but I think the other thing is we've not quite known where the finish line is going to be. Do we have exchanges and study trips?
I've got one example, and there could be more. But one of the things that I think never would have happened in terms of international collaboration. Because it was meant to be a face-to-face, and the idea was this, that our Peru, France and French, German and US partner schools with us would all have a summit, a UN summit, a youth summit, where sixth formers would talk together and debate topics. Now that was meant to be face-to-face in one of the countries, in one of the months at some point. It had been on the agenda for about 18 months and was clearly just not going to happen. But has already happened, and now the second one is planned. So the sorts of things that can be made possible online, I think are really worth pursuing. And even when we do get our exchanges back and we can do face-to-face visits were never there for everybody. And we can make these opportunities a lot more open to a lot more students in this way.
Gemma's question was actually not centred on technology. It was what positive developments should we keep post-COVID? Gillian, what positive developments? Maybe you want to say technology, but maybe there's something else.
No, I don't. No, absolutely not. We're talking about the silver linings of it. There's always a silver lining, and I think this has given us a really good chance to look at our pedagogy. To really, it's almost like having a wee clear out. Having a wee clear out of things that maybe don't work, or things that kind of perhaps a refreshed curriculum narrative where you're looking at actual content that we're delivering that's maybe not age appropriate. It's got no relevance to what the children are actually experiencing, and also looking at teacher health and well-being.
But hang on, how has this come out during the COVID year?
Because we've had more of it. Well, you're beginning to see we've had to use different pedagogies to try and reach children who are sitting at home, okay? And you're looking at some of the things that we're delivering. We're not able to use a lot of the same pedagogy we'd use in the classroom, and we don't have the wee people in front of us. Lack of engagement.
How many of your pupils had iPads to work on?
Well, that's an interesting question. So in Glasgow City Council, all of our students had access to technology, and they either had them through, we had a massive IT role.
All of them had it?
They either had access to iPads or were able to access devices, and we looked at that through the Pupil Equity Fund. So you had children, for example, who may come from areas of high social deprivation, they weren't able to access devices, and they were able to work with head teachers so that we could get that for them. So most of the children in secondary, certainly, and down towards primary 7, primary 6, children that are aged 10 or 11 had access to technology. So
what about this idea of revisiting the entire way of teaching languages and getting rid of the cobwebs, really, in it, you're saying? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a role for that. I think the other point I would add to Gillian's sort of idea there is that there are so many more parents who are working from home, and that ability to be more involved in their children's learning, I think, is a real positive. They're able to perhaps sort of brush off their own sort of rather dusty GCSE French or O-level Spanish or whatever it was, and participate. And I'd like to think that that's something that also will breathe a little bit of life.
But do you think that will, Rachel, do you think that will happen, or do you think parents will heave a sigh of relief that COVID's over and their kids are back at school and they can forget?
I think a little bit of both, but I think during the time when COVID's been upon us and lockdown has been happening, that's where the gap has opened up, because where it was the case that parents were able to be more on hand and more supportive, great. A lot of our learners who did have that, but also had the benefit of the teachers' oral feedback and quite bespoke feedback on their work, and they were doing more speaking, and they were feeling actually that they were getting more attention from the teacher than they would have done in the classroom. They have come on leaps and bounds and potentially have actually been learning better under lockdown than they would have otherwise. But there's a massive gap that's opened up between them and the students who haven't had that support at home, that have had to be phoned from school to say, please log on to your lesson, you've already missed half of it. That have found it really tough to motivate themselves, and that's the challenge for schools now, is to work on bridging that gap.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have my school was quite good, so they used to call parents in the morning to wake them up. So,
you used to call the kids to wake them up,
yeah.
Or call the parents to get them out of bed first.
Both, and then perhaps they were all of them in bed. And some mornings, I just passed the register, and then 10 minutes later, half of them were sleeping. So I just think, and because I give them Spanish names, it was very funny, so I used to shout, Carlos, where are you? Jose? No, of course no one was.
And in Cambridge, did people have iPads or some form?
Yeah, so
everybody?
Yeah, most of them.
Because I hear stories about a lot of places where they didn't.
No, my school was providing laptops. My child's school also was providing laptops, but some of them were a bit dismotivated, I have to say.
Okay, and so positive developments for you after COVID?
Speaking home works.
A positive development, yeah, definitely.
Just that. But you won't be ringing them up saying come into school.
No, I wouldn't have to ring them up, but yeah.
Okay. Let's go on, because we've got a lot of questions here. Simon Terry in Dorking. The new Modern Foreign Languages GCSE proposal, he says, is based on a vocabulary list of high-frequency words. Does the panel think that the vocabulary included is suitable for teenagers? And how does non-thematic teaching work in practice? Rachel.
Well, first of all, I think...
Sorry, should I say, did you develop this vocabulary list? I'm told in my notes that you did.
No, it hasn't been developed yet.
Right, okay.
It's a proposal that there is one. But I think, firstly, I'd say that the most exciting and the brilliant thing for me is that we're talking about frequency. And we're talking about the frequency of words. I think it's a tide-turning moment in language education. I also think that it's really important and really great that as part of that, we're talking realistically about the number of words that students can be expected to learn reasonably over what is essentially 450 hours of learning. And I think these sorts of discussions and these sorts of questions are really worth having. I think that it's focused our minds, therefore, to have a limited number of words and to take them from a high frequency list. It's focused our minds on, so which words and how do we choose them? And until recently, we've done this on the basis of topics. So we have typically taught something like, in Spanish, Year 7, pets. And we have decided to teach them gato, cat, perro, dog. But we've also, in the same breath, taught them pez, fish, serpiente, snake, and raton, because they fit within the topic area of pets. But what they do also is compromise and hold learners back a little bit, because they obscure the fundamental pattern that could be within that for students, which is if a noun ends in o in Spanish, it's masculine. If it ends in a, it's feminine. And we wouldn't be able to pick that pattern out of a lineup from students. We just wouldn't be able to take that from them, from the portfolio of language we presented to them there. So if we accept that that is problematic and we don't wish to place hurdles in their way because we haven't got enough time for that, we want them to be able to make progress fast and to take the essentials, we have to say, okay, well maybe pez goes, serpiente goes, raton goes, what can we put with our gato and perro? We may have to actually think, okay, let's broaden that theme. It's not going to be pets, it's going to be a broader theme that might be things you have at home that are important to you. It could be libro, book, which fits the pattern. It could be bolsa, bag. And then you have a set of words which help students to fix a pattern. They also teach them some very high frequency words. And it's not that it's non-thematic teaching, it's just teaching where the theme is more broadly conceptualized so that students may grasp the pattern.
Okay, let me stop you there for a moment and bring in Helen. What do you think of that?
Well, my answer to the question is no, I don't feel that it's suitable, but that's not because I don't think high frequency is suitable. We've always used high frequency. The nature of language, it has to be high frequency. So something I really like that the NCELP has provided is a tool where you can put in a text and you can see for a text that's given what percent of it is high frequency. And for the current specifications which we have, for the current exams, typically about 85% is high frequency. So we're already teaching high frequency. So that's my first point, is that we may not be talking about it explicitly, but we have been doing it. The idea about the number of words, yes, I think that's, I'm really going through the question, the issues that you said. Number of words, I think that's fine to have that discussion. And I think, yes, it's a healthy thing to be talking about it. It would have been good to have this discussion more openly with lots of people before we had a syllabus which was being proposed. This at the moment is, I think, the issue that a lot of us have, that it has been brought out without that bit beforehand of saying to experts, to other people, to teachers, what do you think about it? And hence why we've got quite over 1,000 people have signed.
And do you agree with Rachel's definition of moving from pets to a more
Well,
a different shape of
I like
word?
pets, and why not? Why not teach pets for pets' sake? You know, I mean, I think in a way, if I'm in a class and I've got children, they want to. I talk about my pets. People often use that as an example of why teach them pets. Well, I don't have children. I talk about my pets. I talk very proudly of my pets. They'll want to talk about their own pets, and I don't want to have to say to them, "Well, we're not doing that pet because it doesn't follow the pattern that I want."
Say that.
And it's not the
Okay.
But we absolutely wouldn't say that, would we? Because we'd have personalisation. So, you know, the chap in your class that's got 17 serpientes, they get to look up serpiente and own that word. But the core words that you're teaching them don't obscure a pattern. But anyone that's got a raton will need to talk about their raton, and they can do that. I don't think that gets in the way at all.
Whereas I suppose I think it does, because I know that when people are putting together textbooks, when people are putting together examination papers, they'll have these lists of these high frequency ones. And we know that, for example, when it comes to the theme of sport, the only thing that the French will be able to put in is wrestling and fishing, because those are the only ones within the top 2,000. The word football doesn't come up. So
I think that's so important. It's about relevance to teenagers. And let's face it, most teenagers aren't talking about their pet mouse. I mean, maybe some are. And so it is actually the topics and the vocabulary that their counterparts, teenagers in France, in Spain, would be using on a daily basis, because that's the vernacular that we want them to be able to adopt, so that when they go and visit the country, they can communicate with their peers.
So what would your view be of how to get cluster the high-frequency words?
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I like the thematic approach. I like the way of teaching the topic of pets or whatever, but I think that what we teach has to be relevant to today's generation. We've got to be using perhaps some more of the technical terminology, you know, because otherwise, you know, and yes, accept the fact that in Spanish the word for Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi, and I think we've got to teach the kids that so that they can express themselves in something that is practical and functional when they go and visit the country.
So how does that differ from what you were saying? What those two?
I think it's about the stage, because what happens is if you refuse to compromise on the patterns and you let, instead of the topic lead the way, you let the patterns lead the way, what you get is a slower build-up towards a particular topic. But out of the high frequency language comes school, comes holidays, comes environment, comes all of the sorts of topics that we can name. They all emerge eventually, but they haven't all been introduced together because the patterning of that vocabulary was not optimal for students to learn it.
Do either of you want to come in on? Yeah, I'll come back to you just for a last word, but do you want to come in on this?
GCSE, absolutely not. No. It's a no from me. It's a no from me.
Okay.
No comment.
Okay.
I think the real issue here, though, is, I mean, it's the detail in particular, that the exam boards are being told that you select your words from the top 2,000 of the most frequently used words. Now, within those words, there are a lot of high-frequency words which they do need. There are also quite a lot which they don't need because of the corpus that it comes from. It's come from an adult corpus. It's been from words that you can get easily online. So when you read the introduction to the book which says these are the words, you know, they've come from sermons, they've come from financial statements, they haven't come from the language which young people are using on their texting, on their phones. They're not going into their houses and picking up words there. The word toilet is 4,127, so that doesn't come within the 2,000. The word budgetary does. And although, and I can sense that perhaps Rachel might come in on that, you know, they're saying 90% of the words have to be high frequency. 10% is not enough.
Why is budgetary a high frequency word?
Well, I imagine it'll be in all of the small print, possibly. It'll be, they're taking it from newspapers. There are words that probably, you know, appear in that.
How often do you use the word budgetary?
I now do, because I'm often using it as an example of...
How often do you actually use the word, but I don't use the word budgetary.
But let's remember that within the top 2,000, we have a word, a proposed word limit of 1,200 for foundation, 1,700. So you have to deselect 300 words anyway, and then you've got the 10% on top of that. So we're not talking about all 2,000. It's no, it isn't. It's better because you're saying you've got to have budgetary because it's in the top 2,000. But you absolutely don't.
I can't select toilet. I can't select toilet because budgetary is one of the words which is within the 2,000. That's stopping. That's meaning that toilet is. I don't know why I'm saying this. Sounds ridiculous. It's more difficult to get the toilet.
I've got to get one more thing in here, which is about the slight red herring of teenager appropriateness of a whole corpus that's got millions, billions of words in it. Because this came up in the in the debate around the subject content, NCELP has run analyses of several different corpora and found that there's a huge overlap in the bracket that we're talking about of 0 or 1 most frequent to 2,000 most frequent words. There is around about an 80% on average overlap of those words when you compare a corpus made up only of text messages between people, so very 20th century, when you compare that with a 17th century literary corpus, and when you compare that with another massive corpus, half of speaking and half of writing.
But I don't
and
have to look at the
overlap.
corpus to know this. I hear young people talk. I take them to France, I know the words they need, I know they talk about football, they talk about their sports. I know what we do know as teachers, and that's all we're asking. Please, could you let teachers be in on this as to what the themes are and what the vocabulary is? Let's not have this artificial constraint of a corpus.
Let's move on, but let me just remind you that sounds as though a lot of you listening or watching will have things to say about that. You can, of course, use the chat button or tweet, and our hashtag is MFLQT, Modern Foreign Languages. For those of you in Scotland, where MFL I think isn't used as an expression. Yes, Modern Foreign Languages, MFLQT. Good, thank you very much. Let's go on to another question, and this one comes from, yes, here we are. Rob Napier, and this question comes from Texas in the US, Fort Worth, Texas. After breakfast, after Brexit, how can we continue to convince parents, school leaders and pupils that speaking English isn't enough if we want to be successful as a nation? How do we convince people that foreign languages are necessary? Baye.
Well, that's a very interesting question because I'm Spanish, so I'm going to talk from like if I were British, yeah? In fact, an Irish, Argentinian, Welsh and a Spanish person is helping me to answer this. So Brexit is a political move. British people are making an agreement to space themselves away and to make their own decisions regarding economy. But that doesn't mean that the economy stops, doesn't mean that business stops, doesn't mean that politics stop. We still have to trade, we still have to do business, we still have to educate, to travel, to relate. All those things are still going on. It would have only been an issue if we are never going to speak with a French, Spanish, German or French person ever again, but that is not the case. And it is important to stress the difference between Brexit and living the rest of your life. So we still have to continue to trade, we still have to continue to advance economically, the country still needs to make money, and the economy needs to move forward.
All right. So in other words, life goes on despite...
Definitely. And I was talking to the British Council last week on Thursday, and they did a recent study, and they found out that 60% of British population are monolingual. 60% just speak English. So if Britain wants to thrive, I think that it's imperative that they start thinking of language as a means to expand into a new market. I'm going to give you another fact. Do you know how much of Britain's GDP, gross domestic product, is lost for not having qualified staff who speak languages?
No. Do you?
I do now. 3.5 of the GDP. So some people will say,
is lost because of administrative delays, because people don't speak foreign languages, or because of their way of trading, or what?
Because they don't speak other languages. So I was
How do you lose 3.5% of GDP because you don't speak
It's
French,
3.5
Spanish,
of
and
the
German?
GDP.
Where did you get this from?
From the British Council.
Right.
So
Well, they have an axe to grind, don't they?
So no. I was 45 minutes conversation with them last Thursday. So I checked what was the current GDP for Britain. It was 1.96 trillion. So 3.5 GDP, I also calculated,
all right.
is 6,860,000,000 that the country is losing because they are monolinguists.
It's a very convincing way of putting it. Rob Napier's question was, how can we continue to convince parents and school leaders that speaking English isn't enough Is it a problem? Is it a problem in Scotland?
It's bigger than Brexit. I mean, we've had issues around about motivation with language learning, you know, since I was a twinkle in my daddy's eye, David, quite frankly. And when we think about it, we need to normalise language learning. It can't be seen as something extra. You know, like people say, what is it you do? And I'll say, oh, I'm a languages teacher. Nobody's ever said, oh, that's terrible, that's rubbish. Everybody said, oh, that's great. I really wish I'd stuck in it at school. Do you know? And we don't see it. We don't see it on the media. We don't in the TV. You know, I'm presuming there's probably subtitles for me right now. But we don't hear languages because it's automatically just hear the English. So we're not exposed to it. And we have to, I suppose, maybe do a wee bit of work around kind of debunking these myths that it's too hard. You know, when I'm speaking to parents and I say, right, if we put it in the Scottish context of the 1+2 languages learning policy, which I'll hope to talk about in a wee minute or two. When we say to parents, so your child's going to do this one and it's going to do that language too, nobody's ever said, oh, that's rubbish. But what we do have is we have maybe parents who've had their own negative experience of learning a language at school because it was only you were only deemed to be a good language learner if you could remember hundreds of words. So lots of people can recite verb tables, but they can't buy you a drink. So, do you know, so it's about that motivation is about looking at developing skills for children. Let's think about developing the young workforce. It's about them being able to communicate. It's about having intercultural understanding, you know, and us being able to make that real to children.
Yeah, but that's the case for it. But the question was how you convince parents of it.
You tell them that.
And are they taking in it? But by a quote, 60% of UK people not speaking a foreign language.
But the thing is, you talk to a parent up the top end of the scheme where I'm from and you say, by the way, all that GDP's been lost. They'll be saying, that's great, I need to go and do my shopping. So what we have to do is to make that realistic for them. So this is about your children staying in the UK. This is not about going abroad or whatever else. This is about making language learning normal. It's just what you do. It's the same go-to as learning maths. It's the same go-to as doing English.
Dominic.
You say they're monolingual, and you say they just want to order a drink. I bet most people can do dos cervezas, por favor. And the reality is, Brexit or no Brexit...
I'm not sure about that Spanish accent.
Apologies, I am a Spanish teacher, there we go. But
Come on, Dominic.
Dos cervezas, porfa. There we go.
You can do that afterwards.
Yeah, all right. But I suppose that's not going to stop people travelling to France, travelling to Spain, going on holiday in Europe, and actually using the language. I talked earlier about relevance. But I think if we are going to be a global trading nation, we need to look beyond just the classic sort of EU languages. We need to, first of all, be teaching French and Spanish as international global languages. So focusing on Central and South America and making sure that the range of cultural topics that we're looking at are exploring, what it's like to live in Peru.
How many schools don't teach foreign languages properly? I mean, you teach at a private school, which presumably makes a good fist of foreign languages. And how many foreign languages do you offer?
So we offer two.
French and German?
French and Spanish. And actually, I mean, it's an interesting question in its own right, because I suppose, at what point should we be thinking about making language learning in the UK more of a global outreach? And at what point should, Arabic or Russian or Mandarin be part of our children's education that will give us, as Britain, a leg up in the world of international trade above our European
I was going to ask what's the situation in Scotland then, because there is a requirement, isn't there?
Yeah.
So would you want to say what? Because
No, hear from you about England.
About England? About motivation, I suppose.
No, about motivation, about how you improve the take-up of foreign languages.
Well, the main thing is, I think, to make it so that school leaders, the question is quite right. We've got to make, parents be motivated, but it's also school leaders who want to make it so that it's compulsory. And that's something where we've got to persuade people that it's worth their while. And at the moment, something which is a really real problem, and has been for a very long time, is something called severe grading, which means that because GCSEs are graded according to comparable outcomes, so that for any particular subject area, there'll be more or less a set of outcomes according to the prior attainment of the students. We've got a situation where for languages, for children of the same broad prior ability, they can expect to get a lower grade in languages than in other EBAC subjects, for example, history, geography, maths and others. So at the moment, there certainly isn't an incentive for a school leader to force everybody to do a language. because it will affect their grades.
There's no instruction on the curriculum that it should be done. It's a voluntary area, is it? Language?
That's true. Yes, because and the other thing is, of course, because we've gone for this government has gone for academisation. Lots of people are being academies. They don't have to do what's on the national curriculum anyway. So even if it were there, they don't have to do that. And that's where it is different from the situation that you've got. But the business about severe grading is the biggest thing for me that has not been addressed. So although people will talk about pedagogy, they'll talk about curriculum, all these ways we're going to motivate them, until we get that right, at the moment we aren't on a level playing field with other subjects.
Rachel, do you agree with that?
I wanted to go back to parents, if that's okay, because I agree with what's been said, but picking back up on something Gillian said about parents and having had poor prior classroom experiences, there is something that we can do about that locally in our schools, and just a couple of things that have worked really well in my trust have been to invite parents in early on in Year 7 to come and have language demystified via phonics. So we teach them in an hour, we give them a glass of wine, the parents of Year 7 come in, we teach them phonics, how the sounds of the language relate to the writing, and by the end of an hour those adults are able to pronounce their way through a map of Spain, sounding very Spanish and enjoying it all the way. But the message behind that is you now are empowered to support your child's learning, because you can read off a list of vocabulary, you can read those words and pronounce them. Your child can then have a good model as they try and come up with the English, and vice versa.
Is it a big problem getting parents to do that, though? Is it a big problem getting children to learn foreign languages? I mean, this 60% figure.
It is.
How does it compare with France or Germany or?
It's
America,
very
indeed, where
different.
The question came from.
The thing that would be more the same is if you took English out of the equation and then you rate France's ability on teaching German, for example, and on the students' ability in German. English has become the global lingua franca, and there's a race to English. There's a race for everybody to get it. They see it as an absolute imperative for life chances. But if you take that off the menu and you look at other foreign languages, you'll find we're not that shabby. Actually, we compare rather more equally. It's just that English skews the pitch.
Yes, right. I think we better go on, because we're halfway through and we've got lots of questions still to come. Kat Cousins in Doncaster: language teaching in primary schools is often underestimated, and many students have to start from scratch when they go to secondary school, even though they've had several years of learning a language. How do we improve the transition between primary and secondary? Gillian?
Okay, I think for this one, this is where it's probably where we have a national policy in Scotland. So we have the 1+2 language learning policy, which means language learning is a hafte, which is roughly translated as something you have to do. And all children have the entitlement to learn languages right up until the end of broad general education, which broadly equates with the age of kind of 14, 15. So they have the entitlement to get the same language all the way through. So there has to be a kind of coherent programme. And if I can give you Glasgow City Council as an example, what we have is a complete, programme from primary 1 all the way to primary 7, plus transition between it. Okay, so you've got transition into that secondary curriculum, and they work as learning communities. Now, we were chatting earlier about when you've got all the different feeder primary schools coming in. We've got one secondary school who might have, say, 50 different schools feeding into it because of where it is geographically. So when we do that 1+2, so that's a language of schooling, that's either English or Gaelic medium, then they have the same language all the way through. So they would have French all the way through, plus the chance to do other languages as well. So you're able to get that. But it's about learning communities working together, it's about staff working together, and about joining that up. So I would say, in a way, you have to get people working together to try and get that, so you don't get that repetition of the language and they're not still talking about cats and dogs.
Is Gaelic counted as a foreign language in Scotland then?
It's not foreign language.
I know it's not, but I mean...
It's an official language. So
but not everybody's taught Gaelic.
No. So you have Gaelic medium education where children are taught through the medium of Gaelic, and you also have Gaelic learners as a subject that maybe would teach French, Spanish or whatever.
And that is the model that you need. In answer to the question as to how will we improve transition, that's what you need. But in England, we can never have that, or we can't have that at the moment. because we've been split up. We no longer have local education authorities which can force anything. So you put it as being, I think, encouraging people to talk together. No, actually, they have to. In your system, it's something which is required. In our system, that could never be. We never will have a situation where anybody could force anything. The only way that you can now change things in our system would be to have a carrot and stick effect. So, for example, if Ofsted were to say, if you don't show that you do transition, we will give you an unsatisfactory or whatever. So really that's the thing. So in England, our situation is that we've got very different patterns according to where you are. So if you're in a part of the country where it's a rural area, where everybody's coming from one school going to the other, yes, of course you'd be able to manage transition. In a city, 50 different feeder schools, we can't. And I think one thing I would appeal to people is to really understand that that's the scenario we're in. It would never be that secondary school teachers don't want to know or don't want to build.
Sorry, but why can't you, if you've got 50 feeder schools, work out what's been going on at those schools?
Well, you can work out what's been going on, but you were talking about having an entitlement for one language all the way through. Yeah. You could have from your feeder schools, some people have done Spanish, some people have done German, some French, because the feeder schools will really do whatever they can do with the staff that they can get and they can recruit. So whereas in your system it's you must have this particular subject being taught all the way through, with us we don't have
but
that.
How would you solve that if you've got big secondary schools and lots of primary schools feeding them?
You can't.
Oh, I see. So it's
what you can do is you can say to them something that, my experience is we still liaise with the primary schools, we get together, we talk about what's good practice, we make, we share ideas. But part of it is saying, look, please don't be depressed if when they come to our school, we can't necessarily carry on with that subject because we haven't got a teacher for that subject. That could well be the case. So you do what you can, but some schools are in a very good position. I've been to talks of people who are part of an academy, part of somewhere where everybody goes from a particular primary school to theirs. Of course they can have that transition.
Yeah. Rachel?
You could nationally stipulate which primary language it's going to be, and that there would be an entitlement for that language, or that language would be a one that is sent through, and students have to have the entitlement to continue with that language. It's controversial.
Which
language would it be?
Well,
what happens in Scotland? Which language?
It was interesting because in one of the recommendations in 1+2 is you don't go for a hierarchy of languages. So it's supply and demand, isn't it? So it's what the teachers are coming through with.
But you've got lots and lots of primary schools and a smaller number of secondary schools, and the primary schools have the freedom to choose the language they teach. How do they come through to the secondary
the way
schools?
that we do it, and again, only speaking for Glasgow, the way that we do it is it's the language of the learning community. So in Glasgow, you will only get a permanent contract as a languages teacher if you've got 2 languages, because you can't do 1+2 with 1.
Sorry, you only get a contract as a teacher?
A permanent contract as a languages teacher in a secondary school, you would need 2
but then
languages.
which language do you teach?
And so, for example, if you take one of the learning communities, so if the majority of the staff are French plus something else, then it's French. So we would train all the primary staff.
So if you live in Glasgow and you send your child to primary school, you'll just be told either it's Spanish or French or German, depending on the
learning community. Yeah.
Would that work?
We have models like that. So, but it's been done sort of where people have agreed. So there's the Hackney model where all of the secondaries and primaries in Hackney have agreed that their language is going to be Spanish. So primaries all teach Spanish and they feed through in Spanish. Hackney is not as small as it sounds. It's the size of Peterborough. So it does have, it's that sort of size area where 11, 12 secondary schools and all of the number of primary schools that goes. So it can be done at that level, but it requires agreement and bringing together a lot of senior leaders around the table of primary and secondary schools to agree at that level.
Would you like all Wales taught Spanish as their primary school language?
Can you imagine?
Yes. What do you think of this?
Why not?
What do you think of the idea, though? Is it a problem for you?
It's not a problem. It's not a problem for me at all.
No, but I mean, in secondary school, people come in. They don't all come in speaking.
They already have a bit of Spanish in primary schools in Wales. A bit, very, very.
Not
basic.
French, not German.
When the feeding school to my school, because we do Spanish every other year, so some years they come with a bit of French and some years they come with a bit of Spanish, and it helps a lot. Yeah. It helps a lot.
I think what we're talking about here is a bit of a postcode lottery. It can be done on a localised area, and in many ways perhaps should be done, because what we don't want is the entire country only able to speak French at the cost of every other language. I think for me, as I lead a secondary school, really what I want is depth rather than breadth. I'd much rather students really have the foundations of, whether it's French or Spanish or something else, I don't mind. But what I don't really want is them to be able to say, my name is, in 6 different languages, having had a little taster of all of them, but never really scratched the surface of, the fundamentals of how language is put together.
And some languages are much easier to learn than others, aren't they, for English speakers, native English speakers?
I would say so.
I mean, Spanish easier to learn than German, for instance.
And I speak here as a Spanish and German teacher, and I think that, yes, Spanish is far, far easier to acquire. The rules are more simple. But I think there's also, I keep banging on about relevance. Where are our families, where are our children most likely to put this language into practice? And the answer is they're probably not going to go on holiday to Germany in a way that France and Spain are natural sort of fits with our cultural experiences.
And yet many will, because you can't, you can't predetermine what our young people are going to do with the language they learn. And plus, German is very different from French and Spanish, and attracts a very significant cohort of interest from students. Sometimes I would say that I perceive, and not with empirical evidence, but have over the last 20 years perceived a distinct interest amongst boys for German, but not just boys. There was a very lovely paper written some time ago called French is the Language of Love and Stuff, and looked at the gender interest in those 2 languages, French and German, and found that was represented in there. I think we absolutely as a country need not to let German go. I think, what would you do, for example, if your primary cohorts, a significant number of them, took up German? Would you put German on the menu in your school if they came with it?
Absolutely, mit gerne. But there is that sort of chicken and egg thing. And I suppose, what we do want is we do want a real range of languages being taught. I touched earlier on perhaps some of the more international, sort of global languages rather than just European, but not at the cost of quality, because it's the quality that's going to lead through to GCSE and then through to A-level.
Let's turn to the quality of the teaching of languages then, because we were talking earlier on about how you choose the words and what the themes of the words would be. But this is a question from Sydney Thorne in York, who says German students studying English learn about US race relations, Australian forest fires, and the growth of India, whereas British students of the same age learn to talk about their pets, Helen, yes, their pets, and how often they wash up. Probably not very often. To what extent is the boring content of GCSE syllabus responsible for the poor uptake of modern foreign languages in Britain? Rachel.
Well, although this question specifically targets the boring content of the GCSE, obviously that would then be talking about the lack of uptake into A-level. But I think we have to look at the whole picture there, because in order to get take-up for A-level, we have to have extremely high take-up for GCSE. But studies on uptake that I know of don't posit a link between the content of the syllabus and the uptake, but they do emphasise that it's students' experiences in the classroom of success or otherwise that really do have a major uptake influence, and the perception of difficulty of the subject as well plays its part. I also think, though, that we have to be realistic here. We have to bear in mind that if maths were not compulsory, there wouldn't be 100% uptake of that either. There would be a strong steer from parents, which we wouldn't get necessarily for foreign languages. But ultimately, when we are looking to reach the government's ambition of 75% of Year 10 learners by next September starting a course and 90% 2 years later, that is going to rely on senior leaders being prepared to change their curriculum plan at Key Stage 4 and change the options provision. In other words, directing students, as Helen said earlier, directing students to take languages. That is going to be extremely important. Of course, when we've got them there, when we've got that uptake, motivation is really, really important. And so we don't we don't need to think just in terms of topics for students with that. Let's look at what teachers think about topics. A recent poll on Twitter had 33% of us only liking the topics that we teach at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, by far the lowest percentage compared with other subjects. Also,
what did they object to? What were they bored about?
It was a very, very small survey. It didn't go into the whys and wherefores. But another survey that was on that was also recently published had 70% of teachers, upwards of 70% of teachers, saying that topics weren't important. I think topics, personally, I prefer to call them themes, but I think themes are important, and I think they can be age appropriate, and there's no reason why they can't be. I would like to see elements of history, geography, popular culture, high culture. I'd like to see identity looked at in slightly more detail at GCSE, the role of language in identity. I think that we should make language an object of study in itself, being aware of where languages come from, how they interrelate. Some linguistics aspects would be really, really interesting. All of that is supported by a frequency-based curriculum.
Gillian.
Again, it's very, very different again in north of the wall, you know, when we're talking about these the syllabus and what have you, and we work within 4 themes, society, learning, employability and culture. So a lot of the things you were talking about, Rachel, we do bring them in all the time, and they all build on each other, right from broad general education through to certification. So I mean, one of the things I'll say to teachers is, when you go to work, do you get excited about what you do? And if they don't, then they need to change it. You know, language teachers are the experts. They should be one driving what's in the curriculum, not somebody sitting in an office who's not got a clue. Do you know? So again, the similarities and the differences to me are quite extreme. So just come and work in Scotland. You have a lovely time where it's all compulsory. You know, and we talk about lots of things.
Maya, what about in Wales? What happens?
In Wales, with the curriculum, well, some of the topics, they are quite hard to teach, and the students.
I mean, do you think it's boring, the syllabus for modern languages?
Some parts, yeah, I have to say.
Which part? Which parts?
If it's boring, surely you should have the autonomy to change that.
Some parts are quite boring, especially at A level. I know that some teachers, perhaps they will enjoy teaching about Franco and history and all of that, but me particularly, I don't enjoy, so I try to make it fun, but
Well, what's boring about it? What are the boring bits?
The whole history thing around, and yeah, it's just
the history.
The history, and to start talking about Franco and yeah.
You're talking about A level, aren't you?
A levels, but on GCSE, yeah, some of the topics they are boring, but you could make it fun.
But you're forced to teach them.
Yeah.
You're forced to.
But I agree, you can make things fun.
But you can
Whatever
make
it
it
is,
fun,
in a way.
yeah.
I don't understand people saying, well, it's boring, because I think any of the themes which are there, which are your personal life, your social life, your local environment and abroad, education and work. What is it about that is not interesting?
Yeah. Sydney thinks pets and how often you wash up is not interesting.
But I think Sydney likes learning about the growth of India. Well, actually, when it comes to A level, we do things which are more interesting. And they love it. The A level.
You have to be able to walk before you can run. And we talked earlier about depth. If the children cannot conjugate the present tense, then they're not going to be able to have an in-depth conversation about forest fires. So I think, we've got to really make sure that they've got the foundations there. But I do agree that many of the topics at GCSE are quite introspective. It's talking about yourself, it's talking about your own area, it's talking about your own pets and life.
It's personal, local and education.
And yet, part of the joy of learning a language surely is exploring different cultures, different ways of being.
We do, which you do. You see, how do they wash up in that country? What they do. They have a topic where it is to compare your daily routine with the routine of someone in Africa. That's what Sidney Thorne could be doing in his textbooks. And some textbooks do.
What African languages do you speak?
So I don't speak
African
languages.
No, I know, but what African languages at all? None.
Well, no, I mean French, where they speak French in Africa,
right,
which I think is, looking at Francophone, and that is something which is in the syllabus. Right. And certainly forest fires, I would say somebody who can't conjugate could still look at a picture of forest fire, read there'd be something that they could get out of it. So we do the environment.
The answer seems to be from all of you that the teachers actually have the responsibility to make whatever it is they're teaching interesting and make fun. Let's go on. I'm going to swoop through these questions a bit because we've got a quarter of an hour or so to go. Angela Taylor in Leeds asked whether there should be a greater role for phonetics teaching, particularly at Key Stage 3, following on from the grounding that primary children receive through phonics while learning to read and write in English. What do you think?
I defer entirely to Rachel on this. This is not my area at
Why?
all.
Why?
Well, because Rachel's an expert on the topic and I'm
but
not.
she'll listen to you and then...
I'm completely unqualified to answer this. And I'm not going to pretend to know enough about it. I think that there are so many different ways that you can teach languages. I think that's the beauty of what we do. Every single language learner has a different approach to learning. I know the way I learn, but that will be different to the way Vaya learns, which is different to the way Rachel learns, which is different to the way you learn, David. And I think actually teachers should be using a range of techniques, and that's the beauty of our discipline, really, which is that you've got to throw so many different tools into the toolkit to make it work and be a good lesson for every pupil. And what works for one child and one teacher may not work for another.
Rachel?
So my answer to the question is yes, yes, yes.
There should be a greater role.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely yes. Because we need to consider that, yes, there are lots and lots of different ways of teaching, but we have certain different contexts in which we teach and learn, and our context is time poor. We have 450 hours in total to get there. And one of the things that phonics does with modern languages learners, and this is different, so where the questioner talks about following on from the grounding that primary children have, I want to just draw out the difference there, because there's a different rationale for teaching primary first English language learners phonics. That is predominantly about reading, because they come after 17,000 hours at the age of 4 to primary school. And if they've been brought up in an English first language background, not all have, but if they have, they will come with 17,000 hours of input already and quite a large oral vocabulary in their heads. And what they learn then with phonics is how to connect that oral vocabulary with the written form of the words. But when we teach modern languages, we have to cut to the chase a little bit there, because we are teaching the sounds and the writing at the same time. And what happens is, if we don't explicitly teach phonics, we still have our learners naturally trying to sound out the words. They will do it anyway. They will try and decode, read the words off the page and try and make sense of them. If we don't help them do that, they will quickly become dissatisfied, demotivated, not think that there is any pattern there to be found at all. We can cut through that by teaching those sound writing relationships head on. It also helps them learn vocabulary much more autonomously, which we know is good for motivation. Students like to feel empowered to be able to do things.
Are you arguing for a change in the method to be laid down, statutory for schools, that they should change the way they teach foreign languages in this way, or just saying it's a good idea?
I'm saying it's a very strongly compelling and persuasive idea. I do not want to legislate and set down a way that everybody must do anything at all, because I think we all have to be convinced of what we're doing in order to be able to do it with integrity. So I present a view. There is some research evidence that supports that view. I'm passionate about phonics and compelled to say that I think it's a good idea to do that, and to point out some of the difficulties if we don't do that. But no, I'm not seeking to legislate.
Helen, you agreement or not?
I think knowing the way that the sound goes with the spelling is important. Recently I was looking at my notes from my training Goldsmiths from 1981, where this is not a new thing. Sound, spelling, correspondence was a thing there. I am aware of the way that you've taught it. We've talked before about different ways of teaching it. And there are different patterns. I looked in a book to see the ways that, different ways of teaching this. And one thing, and the way that I do it, is by, within my set of words, which I'm showing them, I will draw out, notice the way that that is pronounced. And when we come across that pattern again, we notice it again. So that's where I probably wouldn't be in line with Rachel, in that I wouldn't want to have my pets defined by whether or not they end with an O. I would still want to do all the pets, but I would, for those pets, say, sorry, I'm a bit obsessed about pets. I don't, I quite like them. But I would look at it and I'd look at that set of pets and I'd say, so notice the way that one is pronounced. And then when we come across that again, we'd analyse it. We'd say, do you remember how that pet was done? Well, that's the sound from that pet.
That makes sense to you?
I am completely fond.
Are you a pet lover?
You
have to be part of this.
We both love cats. I'm definitely following them.
And that ends in an O in Spanish, but a T in French.
The word pet in Spanish ends with an a.
Cat.
Oh, cat. There's
I may not know much Spanish, but I know enough to know
absolutely,
gata.
yes.
Okay, do you want to come in on this, or should we go on to a different...
No, move on, that's fine.
Move on.
Yes. You want to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, this is one designed for you, which is from Joe McLeod in Inverness, and it's for you too. And it's, should the teaching of indigenous languages be given parity with modern foreign languages? And if so, how do we achieve this? In other words, should Welsh being taught in Wales be given parity? I'm not quite sure. You have to say what you mean by that, but what...
Well, I think that depends of the situation and the circumstances. It's not as easy to say yes or no. So there are part of Wales where Welsh is the first language. They speak in the family, and they speak from a very early age. So then I think, the Welsh is important in their lives and it's going to make a big difference. But then we have some areas in Wales, like for example Monmouth, and they won't be the greatest supporters of our language. So I really cannot see what difference is going to make Welsh in their lives.
Well, put it this way, if you're learning Welsh in a Welsh-speaking area of Wales, and you're learning Welsh and you speak English as well, should you still have to learn a foreign language? You've got two indigenous languages. Should you have to learn a foreign language?
That's an interesting one. Well, I think that you still...
There are three languages.
Three languages, yeah. That happening in my school. In my school, the kids have Welsh, they have English, and they have either French or Spanish.
Is Welsh compulsory?
Welsh is compulsory, yeah.
In
my school,
but
yeah.
not throughout Wales, I think.
Not through the whole.
I mean, it's
and
always
mine
been
is not
talked
a Welsh
about,
school.
They've never quite got that. I mean, in Cardiff, in Swansea.
There are some schools where Welsh is. There are Welsh schools, just only Welsh school and English.
All right, and Gillian, what about Gaelic? I have to declare an interest. My two grandchildren go to Gaelic schools in Glasgow, so they're bilingual, and I think they probably are learning French as well. I don't know, but what's your view about it? I mean, how many schools actually teach Gaelic in Scotland?
There's a number of them that have Gaelic.
Or it's not compulsory, is it?
No, it's not compulsory, but you've got Gaelic medium education where the whole curriculum's still...
That's where my grandchildren are.
Yes. And then you've also got Gaelic learners. It's worth pointing out as well, in terms of the terminology, and I know that, south of the wall you say modern foreign languages, whereas we would just try and say languages because it's kind of more all-encompassing, and I see where it's going, but it's a bit like saying, well, if you're not a modern one, then you're not getting into the party, okay? So in terms of, I suppose, the indigenous languages, in Scotland you've got Scots, as well as Gaelic, which are recognised indigenous languages as well, and they're protected under the European Charter for regional and minority languages as well. So it's an interesting one because people would argue, should there be a hierarchy? The Gaelic question causes all sorts of stuff in the papers, so I'm not even going to attempt that right now, where I might find myself in front of the Herald in the morning. But in terms of it, languages are so associated with identity and culture, so if you ask people who come from a particular region in Spain, then the regional language is something that's very precious to them. Scots, for example, is really precious to me. I was brought up speaking Scots by my dad, and we spoke a lot of Scots in the house, so that's precious to me the same way as Gaelic is. Languages are precious to people. So if we then start saying, should there be a hierarchy? Absolutely not. But one of the things we're seeing is we don't get the access to these languages for various different reasons. But let's look at what's happening in further and higher education. So they keep shutting down languages departments at universities, which, personal opinion, pretty short-sighted. We've got the technology and the present company, which has certainly made the access to language learning much easier. But I think we're on a hiding to nothing if we keep saying, well, the big languages should be the ones that we go on holiday to or the ones that we trade with. One of the recommendations in the 1+2 policy, we should be looking at languages of the BRIC countries. So you're looking at, Portuguese, we're looking at Mandarin Chinese. If we're talking about economy, then we're moving out that way.
And Scots is taught as a language in how many schools?
Scots is an option that they can use under the 1+2 language learning policy. Right. So Scots is there, yep.
Okay.
It's not compulsory.
Anybody got anything to say on that, or we'll move on?
Just final thoughts on that, which is that, for me, modern languages should be a gateway to different cultures. And if, let's say, it's Scots and English are a sense of one's own identity, it goes back to that point about it being quite an introspective experience. And for me, so much about learning a foreign language is about learning about something that is other and different.
Okay. I'm going to overrun a bit because I want to get one other question in before we close. But just this is a question from Jane Orme in Northwood. How can we improve the uptake of modern foreign languages at A-level? In other words, from GCSE to A-levels. Round the table quickly, you.
Greater numbers at GCSE, better results, high challenge but low threat.
Rich and motivating curriculum at key stage 3 and 4. Great teaching will lead to great motivation and communication with the students. And people voice, asking the student what they like and what they don't like. Working with the careers department is key. And that's fun.
Rachel.
An examination experience that doesn't leave students with the idea that they've worked extremely hard and then been thrown things that they've never seen before, which is what we currently have. And it demotivates students who were dead set on doing A-level before they go into the exam, come out of the higher Spanish reading and say, no, that's not for me. I'm not going to do that now. That's made me feel rock bottom. So we need to avoid examinations that make students feel that way.
Helen?
Your point, I think, is very important there, Dominic, but actually having them at GCSE to start with before we get to A-level, and there I'm going to mention again severe grading, because I think that's something which would get more students carrying on doing languages. And I agree about the nature of the examination. I think that's something where we don't have to change the syllabus, though, in order to change that. That's something that can be done.
I'd like to come to the party for that one too. I think what you have to look at is inclusion for everybody, and also think about language learning isn't just about the attainment, it's about the achievement. So we should be able to have that broad spectrum where everybody can be part of it, that we're not just extracting children because, you know, they've got an identified barrier to learn. Languages are for everyone. So, you know, and I know the question is about A-level, but I don't do A-level. So it's about that inclusive experience, and it's about achievement as well as attainment. It's not just about an A-star grade.
Well, we're coming to the end. We've got a question from Andy Martin in Ipswich, which I must just put. He says, the last 18 months have been very challenging for teachers, but in this profession it's important to keep a sense of humour. You can say that again. What were the panel's funniest moments of pandemic teaching so far? The funniest... All right, we'll go round the table. You start.
Well, I was going to say, I haven't had any funny moments. I'm sorry, I found it quite a sad experience, the pandemic. But I've had lots of positive, lovely feelings. We've talked about the fact that teachers have got together. We've been online. I think we've had about 100 webinars when people in their own time have come along, shared ideas, and from that we've had friendship. So I've really enjoyed that side of things.
Dominic?
Funny for me, probably not funny for anyone else, but I started every single one of my upper sixth classes by getting one of them. They had to prepare and tell a joke in Spanish. The jokes were absolutely terrible, but the experience was just uplifting, everyone laughing at each other, not taking themselves too seriously, and it was just a fun way to get them all there.
Were you required to tell a joke in Spanish?
I started. They didn't laugh.
Okay, let's have it.
Okay.
Quickly.
Hay un pez en la pecera y dice al otro, ¿y él? She spoiled it!
Okay, I have no idea what
I'll
that was.
explain it later.
Sorry, Dominic.
Any fun, any jokes you've had?
Yes, when the kids, one of the children didn't switch off the microphone, I could heard him asking Alexa to translate something.
Alexa. Rachel. She has all
I'm borrowing from a colleague in my department who was juggling all sorts of things on this particular morning, teaching from home, teaching her class, and having to also mind her daughter whose nursery bubble had collapsed that morning. And so her little daughter pipes up halfway through the lesson and says very, very loudly while the students were quietly working on something, "Mummy, I need a poo!" And much to the amusement of all of the students, she kept her calm and her cool, this teacher. But it's funny, but it's also a poignant reminder of everything that teachers have had to juggle during this time, which has been huge.
Gillian.
Total Teams failure where I couldn't share my screen or anything, so eventually just took my iPad through to my kitchen where I have chalkboard paint on the wall, and it was back to chalk and talk, just like that, on my kitchen. Glad they couldn't see everything else, but there was me with my wall.
Right, well, our time's up. Thank you all very much indeed. That was terrific. Many thanks for coming here. And it's all we've got time for. That's the Modern Foreign Languages Question Time event. Anyway, thanks to our panel. Thank you particularly to all of you who've been watching and those who sent the questions in. Do let us know what you think about what's been said. And as I said, our panel will, if they can, pick up on some of the points you make. Our hashtag, remember, MFLQT, Modern Foreign Languages QT, from the headquarters of Languagenut in Brighton. Good afternoon.